Assalamualaikum and selamat sejahtera to everyone joining. Sorry for the slight delay. Before we start, first I would like to apologize as this talk is supposed to be conducted in hybrid. But due to unforeseen circumstances, the speaker today, Mr. Joseph Casale, is unable to attend and deliver his talk in person. So I hope maybe next time we can see him delivering his talks physically at Immb. So before I invite Mr. Casale to begin his presentation titled Modeling and Machine Learning for Physical Problems, I would like to invite IMMB Director, AP Dr. Wang Siok Mui, to give a brief introduction on our speaker today.
Hi, Mr. Casale, are you okay so far? All right.
Long day.
Yeah, all right. Okay, it's my pleasure to introduce you. Okay, Mr. Joseph Casale is a highly accomplished data scientist with a strong foundation in both computer science and computational mathematics, holding a dual Bachelor of Science degree from the Rochester Institute of Technology with a 3.9 GPA. He also earned an associate degree in engineering science from Monroe Community College, where he received the Wentworth Scholarship. Currently, Mr. Casale is a research assistant at the University of Michigan, developing deep learning models of the auditory nerve using distributed computing. As a Fulbright finalist, he is conducting geospatial research at UiTM in Malaysia, focusing on AI-driven methods for environmental conservation. His industry experience includes co-op and intern roles at our Autonomous Imagery, Collins Aerospace, and Discovery Machine Incorporated, where he worked on projects in computer vision, edge AI deployment, and machine learning pipeline development. Mr. Casale has led and contributed to research projects involving advanced machine learning techniques such as GANs, variational autoencoders, and graph neural networks. He has received awards such as the Outstanding Undergraduate Scholar Award and the Fulbright Open Research Malaysia finalist title. Proficient in programming languages and tools including Python, Java, C++, PyTorch, TensorFlow, and MATLAB. Mr. Casale, Joseph, is well equipped for interdisciplinary research and development in AI and data science. All right, Mr. Casale, the floor is yours.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. It's a shame that I can't be there today. I guess some flooding made it impractical. I was actually on my way for quite a while before turning around, and now I'm giving this talk from inside my office. So I guess we're given what we're given. So let's make the best of it. Today I'm going to be talking a little bit about myself and my background, as well as Fulbright, and then I'll get into the actual material here. So I come from Rochester, New York, and as was just mentioned, I started off at community college. I was going to do engineering, and I transitioned into mathematics and computer science. And since then, I've been taking up quite an interest in research and specifically applying the theories in machine learning and mathematics to sciences, which can sometimes have different applications or different implications than I previously might have learned in just theory. My connections with Malaysia started in May 2023 when me and a group of students were brought to the Taman Negara, where we placed microphones in the rainforest with the objective of quantifying the biodiversity. And while I was on this trip, I became aware of this organization called Fulbright, which I guess most people are aware of. I wasn't. Fulbright is a U.S. international grant program. Specifically, Macy Fulbright is a subdivision of Fulbright that concerns the exchange between US and Malaysia. So if a Malaysian citizen were interested in pursuing a Fulbright to the United States, Macy Fulbright would be their proxy. And eligible applicants are not just professors, which I have previously told people, but students, professors, and teachers can all apply for a Fulbright. And these programs are fully funded, so they pay for flights, they pay for housing, food, all of these things. So it's a pretty good deal. Undergraduates have this one option, which is spending a semester abroad. If you're a graduate student, there's a couple more options, including study and research. There's also this Hubert H. Humphrey Fellowship Program. And you can apply more than once, and you can apply to more than one position. So there's nothing wrong with reaching out. You could do a PhD or a master's, they'll fund you for up to 2 years. If you're a professor, these programs actually allow you to include a dependent. So that's pretty nice. Also fully funded, and there's quite a few options here. And there's also options for teachers. I'm not sure if dependents are included here. I think they are, but if you wanted to look into potentially pursuing a Fulbright, there's this link, www.macy.org.my. I just felt that it would be proper for me to share the reason why I've been able to have this opportunity. And I think that Fulbright is greatly interested in people from UITM also seeking an application. This being said, I did want to, against some advice, talk about the current state of academics in the US, because I'm sure everybody has heard some of the news because we've been making headlines lately, and Fulbright is not immune to some of these changes. And specifically, I wanted to talk about the story of Romania Ozturk, who is a Palestinian Tufts PhD student, Fulbright scholar. She was arrested from her university for suspicion of having engaged in activities in support of Hamas. The proof provided for this was an op-ed that Ozturk wrote criticizing her university's suppression of pro-Palestinian protests. She is held in a Louisiana detention center, which is a district where the courts are potentially stacked against her, although she is to be sent to Vermont. And even more concerningly, the Trump administration, they are moving to dismiss her request of release under the technicality that they should have filed it in Massachusetts instead of Louisiana. So this is the kind of thing we're dealing with. It's not great. I think that a lot of people are painfully aware of these things. But I did want to mention that people in the United States are also painfully aware of this as well. This particular case did raise public awareness, and there are a lot of protests going on concerning this. She was in her final year of her PhD, and there are some people who believe that the First Amendment freedom of speech should not necessarily apply to people who are foreign in the US, which is not how the literature is written, and it's never been interpreted that way in history. So we can only hope that the right thing will come back and we will stop going down this trajectory so that we can be hospitable to future international scholars. Additionally, there's this, you might have heard of this, the Big Ten. This is a coalition of universities who have the objective of protecting academic integrity and pushing against suppression from federal authorities or other authorities that are trying to determine what they can and cannot teach, and potentially protecting students who are exercising their rights on campus. including in these universities, by the way. I don't know if Dr. Zoll was able to make it. University of Maryland. So that's a wink to Dr. Zoll. University of Maryland is included in Big Ten. Also the University of Michigan, which is something that I am now much more proud to be affiliated with. I've always been proud, but now I'm particularly proud. So for a sudden change, let's go, now that that's over, talk about what I am supposed to be talking about today, which is machine learning and my work. I'm going to be starting off by giving a little bit of a overview of what supervised machine learning is, just in case some people might not have heard of this. And then I'm going to be going over some specific applications that I am currently involved with, and how the principles of supervised machine learning apply to these real world applications. So supervised machine learning is the process of mapping inputs to outputs when you are informing your model by what the expected output is supposed to be. There's a reason why the machine learning guy looks like this, which I'll get to, but the idea might be if your input is a set of images, your output is perhaps a label that indicates what is present in the image. So if you give it a cat, it should say cat. If you give it a cat, it should probably not say mouse. That would be penalized. And supervised machine learning classification is pretty ubiquitous. It's a very well understood topic, which is why these principles are often applied vicariously, you could say, to other types of learning. For example, with large language models, to my knowledge, all of the models, so like ChatGPT, Claude, all of these models are, even though they're referred to as unsupervised or self-supervised or whatever it may be, mathematically very similar to supervised machine learning. For example, if you have the sentence, the cat climbed up the tree, or the cat climbed then the objective of the model would be to classify what the following word would be. And so you're taking the process of unsupervised generation and you're framing it in a supervised manner to make the problem more manageable. I'm not going to be going too much into mathematics in this lecture, I promise. I guess I'm kind of a math guy, so it's going to happen a little bit, but I'm going to try to, or I decided to try not to go too far into this. But the definition for supervised machine learning and how you would do this is you define a loss function, and that loss function depends on the parameters of your model, and it says how poorly your model is doing on training data. So if you evaluate your model on all the data, you use your loss function to quantify how bad it is. And then the objective is to minimize that loss function. And the parameters of your model that are responsible for minimizing that loss function are considered the best parameters. So if your model is this h of x function, which is just a line in n-dimensional feature space, you can find, this line is parameterized by theta 1 through n plus 1. You define your loss function perhaps as the difference between the output of your model and y, and then you find the theta that minimizes that loss function. So that's kind of the whole deal with this. And this process in typical applications of machine learning are repeated. So you create your model, you generate your predictions, you calculate your loss and do your testing, and then you regenerate your parameters. And you do this cycle where you are continuously, incrementally improving the performance of your model. And there's a lot of predefined tasks. This is kind of the current state of a lot of machine learning research, where you might be working on a task like speaker identification, and you have data that is established for this task. And then you train and you evaluate and you tell the world that you're 0.5%, or, well, that would be a big deal, 0.2% better than the previous state of the art. So this can, in my opinion, sometimes be a little exhausting, which is why which is why I don't view this research as my particular field of interest. But they do establish some techniques that are very valuable. So this, for example, if you are dealing with images, it's been well established that methods such as convolutional neural networks and transformers, and somewhat recently, not as recently, I guess, it's been a couple years now, but diffusion models. Language modeling is often done with transformers as well. Recurrent neural networks, they're referred to, long short-term memory networks. They preserve the context of a sequence as you go through the sequence, as you can imagine, might be relevant for language. Markov chains, these are used a lot in machine learning. They're very common, but they're used in language as well. Specifically for if we're transitioning from typical applications, you might end up finding in sciences, and this is what's more important, is the domain-specific constraints. I have here, generic modeling techniques often fail in real-world domains without respecting application-specific rules. So, for example, if you have a application in science, such as a physical application in physics, you can give hints to your model, such as, okay, well, it should obey the conservation of energy, right? And by providing these hints to your model and constraining your model, you can reduce the complexity of the problem. And because in the real world, the problems can have a relatively high complexity, anything that you can do to improve the viewpoint that your model has on the problem can sometimes help it to learn. So these constraints can often be learned without being explicitly coded, but this is another thing for the model to learn, and sometimes it just might end up, it's another place for the model to be stuck in, and it's referred to as a local minimum. And it can also be a matter of safety. You could imagine if your model is controlling a nuclear power plant and there are some outputs that are incompatible, you might want to have some hard constraints in there to prevent something bad from happening. Some examples of these constraints, causality is the one that we'll be concerned with in this presentation. Causality constraint means, only use current and past data to make your predictions. An example of something that would not adhere to causality might be language. The words at the end of a sentence could impact the meaning of words in the middle of the sentence. So causality is not an assumption that you would make for language. But for something like finance, it just doesn't make sense to consider the state of the market in the future when you're trying to assess the state of the market now. Again, physical laws, enforcing conservation, symmetries, things like that, this can be critical in making successful physics simulations. And then there's also the ethical concerns. For example, let's say you're making a model that is screening potential future employment. You probably don't want your model to score someone's resume based on their name. That would be something that you would want to have in mind. For part 3, I'm going to be talking about applying these principles in the fields that I'm currently working with. My first study with the University of Michigan is a project where we did modeling of the auditory nerve. So the task here is, again, we're mapping x's to y's. The task is to project the input waveform to the ABR, auditory brainstem responses. So this could be framed as a classification problem as well if you split this up into pieces and map it in pieces, retaining the context of the past. So the way that these constraints would be implemented for the causality constraint, which is just saying that the likelihood at a given point is only dependent on the data you've seen so far. This could be implemented architecturally. So this can be encoded clearly as a constraint that is implicit in the way that the network is evaluated. The modifications to architecture that could achieve this constraint are things like causal convolution and attention masking if you're using transformers. Basically make sure that the things in the future are not looking at the things in the past. And then there's also the phenomenon of the firing rate saturation, which is to be satisfied, or could be, it's something that is observed in nature. So one way to achieve this behavior would be for activation functions, which are a part of the neural network to achieve this nonlinear behavior. You would choose an activation function that saturates. So something like ReLU continues to grow, right? It grows forever. It does not saturate. Something like hyperbolic tangent does saturate, and it begins to slow its growth. So this is part of the poster that we produced. There was an enormous amount of laboratory effort that went into this, which I had no part of. I have only been involved with this aspect of the project, which is where I prefer to be. I think it would be nice, to see the actual scientists do work in the lab, but I have my contributions here. What we did was implemented some previously existing architecture and made modifications to obey constraints. And we also made some interesting paths in the loss function, which allowed us to learn this projection, even though the targets, which are measured through EEG stickers, were very noisy. These targets, the actual signal was buried within these noise. If you've ever seen EEG data, you'd know that it's not as clean as it can look in theory. An interesting result that we had was we found that when training on just speech data and then evaluating on speech data, we had a relatively high error, still low, but it was a relatively high error. But we consistently found that training on both speech and tone burst data and then evaluating on speech data achieved better results. So in other words, incorporating tone bursts into the training data helped it predict what the auditory nerve's response would be for speech, which is interesting because that indicates that we are, to some extent, learning underlying mechanisms of the auditory nerve through the machine learning model, and we're not just learning to memorize patterns that we see in the data set. For the second study, which is something that I'm doing here now, we are working to classify the species of trees using hyperspectral imagery. So before getting into that, the key here is convolutional neural networks. If you have an image, the typical image has 3 bands of information. It has red and green and blue. And the way a convolutional neural network does things is you pass this filter over the image, and this filter recognizes patterns spatially. So you can see that these filters are 2-dimensional, just like each band of the image. And that results in some filters learning to recognize certain features, certain patterns. And if that filter is activated, then it will produce a higher number. And that is something that can be associated with a particular class, for example. So the key here is that these convolutional neural networks recognize spatial features. They don't recognize features across the channels, because in a typical image, red, blue, green, it doesn't have much pattern information represented spatially. It's more of an averaging deal than anything when you're associating color. But in this task, we are working to map hyperspectral images into the prediction classes. So this is an example of the hyperspectral image where it is a picture of the trees from above, and these are where our ground surveys were to identify what species of tree is at this point. And the objective is to predict this, where every color corresponds to the class present in that region. But in reality, the hyperspectral image actually looks more like this. It's not a two-dimensional image like this. It is a volumetric cube. And there is information that can be, as you can see even here, the information in this frequency dimension is potentially more important in this application than the information in the spatial direction. So you either want to convolve along the frequency axis or you want to modify your architecture to be able to capture information in both the spatial and frequency axis. So the special considerations here, since we have more bands of frequency information, in this case 288, instead of using a two-dimensional convolution, you would prefer to use something like a three-dimensional convolution. And specific in this application, because it's all pictures of trees, the magnitude of the bands corresponding to green visible light dominate most of the other bands. And accordingly, there's a lot of information in those other bands that are going to be relevant to classifying which species of tree is there. So to handle this, you would do a different approach to scaling the data. Instead of scaling the data from 0 to 1, you'll treat every band individually and make sure that every band has an equal contribution. There are some limitations to the assumptions that have been made so far, as this is an ongoing project. This is the current state of my loss function, and the concern that I have is between term 1 and term 3, I expect there could be some redundancy here. Term 1 is the cross entropy loss, which penalizes wrong predictions. And term 3 is the variance. And the idea is by reducing variance, I can encourage not predicting staticky images and to predict clusters. But cross entropy potentially does have this implicit relationship with the variance, and it might not be contributing much. So this term is something that has to be looked into further. And this second term here is to encourage accuracy on average, that the centroid of the cluster and the size of the cluster is relatively correct, not necessarily just accurate on a pixel by pixel basis. And then another limitation is that this cross entropy, which is the primary term in the loss function to begin with, this assumes that I have a balanced data, that every class in my data has a relatively similar number of examples, which is just not true. So there are other methods that can be taken to account for this issue. And here, this is an example of some of the outputs of the model at the current state. On the left is the target mask, and in the middle is the predicted mask here. As you can see, as you would expect, the predefined boundaries here, they're all straight lines because these are generated. It's interpolated. That's how I created these. That's how I created these masks, and it's not necessarily, or it's absolutely not true that this is where the true boundary lies. So to deal with this, you could potentially incorporate some sort of self-supervision where you update your labels with confident predictions. You could also try to vary the method by which you interpolate the data so that you can incorporate more diversity into the data set as well. And then also I am giving equivalent value at the moment to all of the samples, even though some of the ground surveys could have GPS inaccuracies, and this is going to be steering the model in the wrong direction. But this, given the current state of this project, it's really a game of trying to think of what in this specific domain is going to be a challenge for the model and trying to imagine how you can ease the representation of this problem so that you can make it easier to learn. And that's what I'm working on doing. So that's it. I made this talk a little bit short because I wanted to be able to open it up and talk to people today. I didn't anticipate being remote. I guess the flooding kept me at a distance. So that's a little bit unfortunate, but if anybody has any questions or comments or anything to talk about, I would love to talk to anybody about this. Thank you. And also thank you to the Journal Club for giving me the opportunity to come here. If it wasn't for that invite, I would have just sat alone in my thoughts here. So thank you for having me.
Okay, thank you, Joseph, for the interesting presentation. We are open for Q&A, so if any of you have questions, you may type them in the chat box or you may unmute yourself.
Thank you, Gina. I didn't see your comment until now. What is my study in Malaysia? So my study in Malaysia was the hyperspectral classification task. So we are working to use machine learning to recognize the spatial and frequency patterns and associate that with the classification of a tree. Because all of the trees might look the same in a typical image, but in hyperspectral imagery, the biochemical processes that differ between species of trees are potentially regressible and could be used to classify their label, their species. Yeah. So machine learning is a subset of AI where you, and by the way, this is for Jiraya Togman, thank you. It's where you learn to solve a problem in a computer without explicitly telling the computer how the problem should be solved. So it's machine learning is in some sense a mathematical discipline where you are learning to optimize your problem. So it's sort of an optimization problem, but artificial intelligence is the general field of having a computer make decisions and guide, do something that you might be able to define as intelligent, depending on, it's a pretty broad field. Anything could be considered artificial intelligence if you're imaginative enough. Consider the terminology of the rule. So the question, do you consider the terminology or the rules of the domain you have in machine learning? For example, characteristics of the species. So at the moment, there are no, that could be relevant to the physical constraints concern. At the moment, the objective is to learn these patterns. There is data so the idea is that the patterns that can decide which species of tree is present is underlying in the data. So if this species tends to have this current spectral profile, then it could correspond to its general pattern, and it should be something that could be generalized. Also, there's other data that's present as well, such as the LiDAR information that hasn't been incorporated yet, and that tells you how tall the canopy is. So that type of information could also be relevant. So when it comes to making these, I think it's anything that could potentially identify patterns or be an indicator of a species is a good thing to try to incorporate into the features. So yeah, if anybody had any ideas for that, that'd be amazing. What advice would you give to students who are interested in pursuing a career at the intersection of machine learning and medical sciences? So I don't come from the medical science background, but I was able to become involved with neuroscience research because I took an I took a interest in it as a hobby somewhat. I started, at first I just like watched a bunch of content online about neuroscience, and I got a couple books, and then I ended up reaching out to a professor at a neighboring university, asking if I could talk to him about neuroscience, and that ended up leading to the work that I have at University of Michigan once he transferred over there. So I think if you want to get started working in the application of machine learning to medical sciences, step one would probably be to familiarize yourself with machine learning and familiarize yourself with the field of medical science that you're interested in, and then reaching out to people that are working in that field of medical science and being like, hey, I know machine learning do you have any problems might that you wish you could, have the manpower to work on? I can take one of those off your hands, and so that I think that's a good idea. And a postgraduate student studying fit. So postgraduate student currently studying. Postgraduate as in you already have a master's degree or a PhD? Or is this, because this is, or is this in the process of achieving currently pursuing a PhD? I think one of those programs, if I go back and check, one of those programs that I found, yeah, they have durations of 10 months and up to 2 years. So I think that someone who's pursuing a PhD currently, there are options to apply for spending a semester, but I'm not entirely sure. I think I'll put the link. It's www. Let me find it. macy.org.my. So yes, thank you, Gina. I think there's probably some options. It'll definitely open up more after you have your PhD because there's so many. I think between those three programs for people who already have their PhD, there's a lot of options there. So yeah, thank you everybody who's asking me
A
questions.
question from Dr. Hyo Chongshin. What would be the possible outputs from your Fulbright study in Malaysia?
Well, I think one of the outcomes I'm hoping for is to be able to do things like what I'm doing today and talk to everybody. That's one of the things that Fulbright really would like for me to do, and I would like to do as well. So it's an honor to be here. I hope that the work that I'm doing before I leave will have some interesting results that contribute to the body of science. But that's something that I have to take as it comes as well. I think more than anything, I want to be able to reach out to people. The reason why I made my talk so short, like 35 minutes or something like that, was because I wanted to talk to people after it was done. So I hope to be able to do this more and talk to more people. Thank you, Gina. And I don't know who's doctor and who's not, but thank you, everybody. Any conference I plan to join while I'm here? I might be attending a conference remotely for the neuroscience work. I hope that we can do some conferences here, me and Dr. Zool. We'll see. No current plans. I hope so. I want to go to conferences, and we'll see. Yeah, if anybody wants to invite me to one, I'd love to go. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Primaro, if I said that right.
I think that is the only questions we have. Thank you so much, Joseph Casale, for the informative and engaging presentation just now. I hope we can have you at Immb in person next time.
Yeah, let me know. Let me know. Hopefully, there's no floods.
Okay, thank you so much to everyone joining. And please don't forget to fill in the attendance form. I've shared the link on the chat box. So before leaving, please fill in the attendance form. And thank you so much for joining. Thank you, Mr. Joseph Casale.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Joseph, may I share this recording to our YouTube channel?
That'd be great. Yeah.
Okay, I'll share you the link later.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye, Joseph. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.